Okay, I just signed up to do the 2026 Tour de Yoop 10-day, 1,200-mile bicycle ride around Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I've done this ride the past 2 years. It's a really good, challenging endurance ride. It is not a race. It's more like a epic cycling, endurance, sightseeing adventure. Um, Really good ride. Get a lot of sightseeing in. It is challenging. It'll challenge you every single day that you're up there. But what I wanted to do was put together a video of my training program of how I train for this. I've made some adjustments from the first year to the second year to this year, and I'll go over what I did the first year and the second year and what I plan on adjusting this year for this. But basically, you're doing 10 consecutive century plus rides in a row. There's no days off, there's no breaks. It's just you get going and you do your 10 days. You have 2 days that are in the 114 to 116 mile range. You have 6 days that are 120 plus miles, and then you have 2 days that are 130 plus miles. So I'm not a personal trainer, I'm not a cycling coach. I do have decades of experience training for all different types of endurance events, from back when I was in the military to getting into running marathons to then when I transitioned from running to cycling and started getting into century rides and doing a few double century rides. And the one thing that I found in common with all these different endurance events is you have to train up for them. You have to go through some type of training process to get to the point where you can set yourself up for success. So the first year that I did this in 2024, I was looking into, well, how do I train for this? And I really couldn't find much information on how to train for something that was 10 consecutive century or century plus rides in a row. I did have two cyclists that I know from group rides that both did the bike ride across America. One did the southern route, one did the northern route. And I asked them, well, how did you train for that? And I talked to them separately, and both of them told me that they did a lot of long days in the saddle, focusing on HR Zone 2 bike rides. So I tried doing some more internet searches, and I'm like, well, who else would do this type of rides? And I started thinking about, well, the racers that do like Tour de France and other long tour rides, obviously they're in a completely different level, nowhere near that to what they're doing, but they have to get ready somehow for this. And what it found is before they get into their intense training before the races, as they lead into tour season, they spend a lot of long days in the saddle doing HR Zone 2 rides. So I figured there's got to be something to this HR Zone 2 training for these long endurance events. And that's how I set up my program for it. And what I found was that from my research with the HR Zone 2 rides, your body tends to recover quicker from these rides than when you're doing high intensity rides. And also you're less prone to get injuries during a long training program when you're doing these long rides. So the first year in 2024, I went back and I looked at my numbers, and I was putting in from April, May, June, and July, just over 1,400 miles a month. I was doing 2 centuries a week, one on Wednesday in the middle of the week and one on Saturday, and then I was sprinkling in other rides. And all my rides are strictly focused on heart rate Zone 2. Went up and did the 10-day, 1,200-mile ride and felt that I was very well prepared for it and everything went well. But I kind of questioned, did I overtrain for it? So when I trained last year, I backed off on the mileage a little bit. What I did was I cut back from like 1,400 miles a month to just over 1,000 a month. Instead of doing 2 centuries a week, I replaced my Wednesday century with a 70 plus mile bike ride. And I still did my century every week on the weekends, and then sprinkled in other rides throughout the week. But basically lowered my miles. Still was able to complete it last year. I can't really say for sure how much difference it made, because last year they had the unlikely event of really bad Canadian wildfires. And so for all 10 days, we were breathing in the smoke from those wildfires because the winds were blowing from Canada over Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So you had this smoke you were dealing with. And every night I'd get to the hotel at the end of the ride, I'd lay down in bed and I'd start hacking and coughing, like almost like you had a smoker's cough. So I can't really do a true comparison as far as those, but I can tell you that reducing the mileage, I was still able to complete the event and everything went fine. So what I'm going to do this year is, it's already April 2nd. The first full week of April starts next week. So next week I'm going to start my training for this and put my schedule down to hold this up. Hopefully you can see it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ride 5 days a week. And for the month of April, I'm going to start off on Mondays with a 45-mile ride. Now, it's not going to be exactly 45. It might be 44, 46, or 47. I've got different courses that I ride, and so I don't like riding the same course every day because that would get boring over a 4-month training period. So, but it'll be a mid-40s ride in heart rate zone 2. Tuesday will be a rest day. And what I mean by a rest day is I'm not going to ride my bike. I may get up and go for a short walk in the morning, like 4 or 5 mile walk, but I'm not going to do any bike riding. Then on Wednesday, I'm going to do a 75-mile HR Zone 2 ride. And I'll get into a little bit later why I chose on that. Also on Mondays and Thursdays, I'm going to throw in gym days in the afternoon. So I do go to the gym. I go to Planet Fitness. Take about 75 to 80 minute workout. I start out in the ab room and work on my core for about 25 minutes. Then I go out to the main gym area and just hit all the different machines and make sure I hit both upper and lower body and hit all the different machines in there so I get each muscle group a little bit of a workout. And I try and hit the gym at least 2 days a week. Some days I'll throw in a third gym day on one of my 2 rest days. Then on Thursday, I'm going to do a shorter ride, 30 miles in zone 2, and Thursday will be my second gym day. Friday, I'll take a rest day. Saturday, I'm going to do a Century Zone 2 ride. And then on Sunday, I typically go to a local rail trail with my wife, and we just do a real easy ride. So that'd be like a Zone 1 recovery ride for me. And it'll be at least 30 miles. Depending on how far she wants to go, it could be 40 or 45. But it's basically going to be a real easy day on the rail trail. And I'm going to do that in April just to build my base miles up. Now, I live in Central Florida, so I can ride year-round. I've already been riding. So in January, February, March, I've already done a century in each month. My mileage has varied from the mid-600s to the low 800 miles each month. So it's not like I've been just sitting on the couch doing nothing. What I would say is if you live in a northern climate and you haven't been able to ride over the winter, or if you've only been riding on your indoor trainer a couple days a week and you don't like riding it that much, so you limit that to 1 hour rides. What I'd say is you don't want to jump right into this program. Maybe take April and May to build yourself up, and start in April and May where maybe you're just doing 3 days a week the first week, 4 days a week the second, and you're starting at lower mileages. So maybe on your Wednesday ride, your first week, you're doing a 30 miler, and on your first Saturday ride, you're doing a 30 miler. Then the second week, add 5 miles to the Wednesday and add 10 miles to the Saturday, and build that up so that by the time you get through the month of May, you're up to where you can follow this schedule. And I think if you do that and then you follow the long schedule for the month of June and the month of July, then you should be fine for doing the whole 10-day program up there. Now, what I'm going to do in May through July is I'm going to change up a little bit. I'm going to keep everything the same except for on Mondays and Thursdays. So one of the things that I thought I was lacking a little bit, because I'm here in Central Florida and everything's pretty flat where I live, which is really good if you're doing heart rate zone training, because you're on flat ground. You can get in like your zone, like zone 2, and just stay in it because you're not hitting all kinds of elevations and bouncing up and down. But one of the things is there are a lot of hills up there. There's not mountains like if you go to Six Gap and do the Six Gap Century, but there's a lot of hills and you're going to do a lot of climbing. And I really didn't do any of that in my training the 2 previous years. So I think what I'm going to do is once I get sometime in May, I'm going to replace this Zone 2 ride on Monday with a ride on a hilly course. So that way I get some riding. Obviously, when you're on your bike and you're riding, you're in a slightly different position when you're riding, and you're using your leg muscles slightly different when you're climbing on hills versus than when you're going on flat ground. So then I'm going to try and get a hill ride in once a week for May, June, and July, and I'm going to do that on Mondays. Now, another thing I'm going to change up is on my Thursday ride, I've got in here intervals or tempo. I'm going to do some type of high intensity ride on Thursday. And the main reason I'm going to do that is when I come back from this ride in September, there's 2 races that I want to do. So there's a circuit race on Saturday, and that same weekend there's a road race on Sunday. And the road race is on a hilly course. The circuit race has a little bit of elevation on one straightaway, but it's pretty flat course. But just to try and get ready for that a little bit, rather than wait until I get back from this ride to start doing any high intensity training, I'm going to throw this in. But all my other rides, I'm still going to keep at zone 2 and then my zone 1 recovery ride on Sunday. And that's the program I'm going to stick with. Now, if I notice that doing this interval and tempo training is starting to affect negatively on my long zone 2 rides, then I'll just dump that back to a zone 2 ride. But I'll give this a try and see how this works out. And if I follow this schedule, then for this year, I'm looking at putting in just over 1,100 miles a month, which will be about 100 miles more a month than I did last year, but it'll still be about 280 miles less a month than I did the first year. Now, one of the reasons that I do a 75 mile on Wednesday is I pick that distance because that's right after I typically hit the wall. Now, I know hitting the wall is typically associated with marathon runners, and I know back when I was younger and would run marathons, I would typically hit the wall around the 21 or 22 mile mark, and it would take me about a mile to push through it. And then once I pushed through it, I felt fine again. Well, I noticed as I got into long distance cycling, I'd have a very similar experience. I'd hit the wall at about the early 70 mile mark, like 72, 73, 74. And the main difference is that when I hit the wall cycling, instead of it taking me a mile to push through it, it would take me 3, 4, sometimes 5 miles to push through it. And it sucks because you feel like you're going backwards, you're not making any progress, you're having to push through that. So I figured by setting my Wednesday rides at 75 miles, I'm pushing through that on my Wednesday rides. And eventually, as you stick with this program, you're going to get to a point where you're no longer hitting the wall. You'll get to the point where you'll finish your Wednesday ride, you'll finish your Saturday Century ride, you're not hitting the wall. Then you get further into your training program, and you get done with your Century rides on Saturday. Instead of just feeling exhausted, like you just want to take a shower and sit on the couch or hit the lounge chair and chill out the rest of the day, you're going to feel like, I still got energy. I want to go out and do something. Like, I want to go out to dinner. I want to go out to a movie. Or I want to go walk around the mall. You'll start feeling better, and you'll have more energy and as you get further and further into your training program. And one of my goals that I set for myself is where I want to be when I arrive there is I want to be at the point that I'm no longer hitting the wall on my long rides. If I'm getting past the point that I'm no longer hitting the wall on those long rides, I know I'm good for this 10-day, 1,200-mile event. So that might be something you want to look at as far as if you happen to be one of those cyclists that you hit the wall at a certain mile marker, that as your training program progresses, that you get past hitting that wall portion. Another thing that I'd recommend, and I've done this the past 2 years, is sometime in June, I'll do a back-to-back Century. So I'll pick a weekend, and I'm retired, so basically every day is a Saturday to me. So I'll either pick a Saturday and a Sunday or a Friday and a Saturday, whatever days are better weather-wise, and I'll knock out a back-to-back Century. And there's a couple reasons, or a few reasons for doing that. One, it's going to give you an idea of what you're going to feel like when you get up there. And Also, when you get done with your second century, the next day, if you do your second century on Sunday, you're not going to do your 45-miler on Monday. You're going to do probably just a 20-miler Zone 1 recovery ride on Monday. But when you go out and do that recovery ride on Monday, it'll give you a good idea of what you're going to feel like on day 3 up there. So I would recommend that sometime as you get near the middle of June, you start looking for a good weekend. Either middle of June, third week of June, last week of June, go out and do back-to-back century rides so you know what your body's going to feel like when you do that, and also how you're going to feel when you just start day 3. So I do that each year just as a reminder of what I'm going to feel like as I start getting into these events. Now, another questions I've had come up is, do I do anything longer than a century ride while I'm training for this event, because all the rides up there are Century Plus rides? And the answer is no, and the reason for that is when you're doing HR Zone 2 rides, you tend to go a lot slower mile per hour wise than when you're doing your normal century ride. So it's going to take you a lot longer. Typically my Zone 2 century rides take me about 6.5 hours of pedal time, sometimes 6 hours and 45 minutes of pedal time, depending on the winds and temperatures and things like that. And you're going to be going a lot faster up there on your ride. So you're going to be pretty comparable as far as saddle time, seat time, pedaling on your Zone 2 century rides compared to your longer 120-mile rides. So there's really no need to, I don't feel like there's a need to go out and do a 120-some-plus mile ride before you go up there. If you're knocking out your centuries and you're staying in Zone 2, you're fine. Now, another thing I've run into is in Central Florida, it gets really hot and humid. So by the time I get into June and into July, you're getting temps in the 90s with the humidity feel like temperatures in the triple digits. So I start my rides earlier and earlier in the morning as I get into the summer. But even then, the last 2 hours or sometimes 2.5 hours of my ride, it'll be brutally hot. And it's really hard to stay in heart rate Zone 2 when you're getting that hot and humid. So one of the things I'll do is I also have Garmin power meter pedals on my bike, so I can monitor my power. And I'll look at what my power is early on in the ride, and I'll say, okay, when I'm riding with the wind, I'm doing this many watts. When I'm fighting the wind, I'm doing this many watts. When it starts getting really hot and humid, and I know I can't keep my heart rate in Zone 2, I'll switch from monitoring my heart rate in Zone 2 to monitoring how much power I'm putting out with my power meter pedals. And I'll try and keep in that low watt area in order to get around that. So that's one of the techniques I use. If you live in an area where you have a lot of hills and training in a heart rate isn't practical because you're constantly going up and down hills, then you may want to investigate training based on your power, based on your watts, and look into doing low watt training rather than low heart rate training if you live in a really hilly environment. So now what I plan to do is I plan on throwing together a number of other videos and link this into a playlist where I'll go over what's it like on a daily ride day, what's the entire course like, an overview of that, what I pack to take up there, what do I do nutrition-wise, not only during training, but what do I do nutrition-wise each day on the ride, like what do I leave stuffed in my jersey pockets when I roll out of the hotel room parking lot every morning to start the day, and try and give you some more info on the ride. Now, if you do sign up for this ride, the promoter, James, he hosts Zoom meetings that'll be specific to this year's event or the current year's event. So I would strongly suggest that you attend the promoter's Zoom meetings, because they will give you actually specific information on this year's event, where I'm just going to give you information based on my past experience as a participant in this event and things I noticed and things I did to help me out along the way. So hopefully this helps you out, gives you an idea of what I'm doing. So right now for this year, I'm looking at putting in just over 1,100 miles a month in April, May, June, and July. Oh, one other thing, when do I stop training for this? Well, the ride starts on a Friday, and I drive from Central Florida to Michigan. So I don't push the drive. I stop a lot and take breaks and get out and stretch my legs. And I stop at night at hotels on the drive up. So I spread it out over 3 days. I get to the Upper Peninsula Wednesday night. And then what I do is on Thursday, I go for a short 25 or 30 mile bike ride just to make sure everything's working okay and to spin my legs out before the ride starts on Friday. So I'll ride up until either Saturday or possibly Sunday before I leave. And then I'm off my bike Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday, I do a real short ride. And then Friday, the event kicks off. So hopefully this helps you out. I know it's a very small event. So even if I don't only get a few viewers that look at this, even if it only helps 1 or 2 people, it'll be worth it. So have a great day. And if you're going, good luck. And I'll see you up there. Bye.